So a warm welcome to everyone from around the world, from British Columbia in Canada. We just arrived here in Creston. I should think it's probably 2 or 3 hours ago, having driven across the Rocky Mountains from Calgary during the course of the day. By way of introduction, my name is Richard Jones. I'm a part of Fatherheart Ministries, and Shireen has asked me if I would host today, since in Singapore, I believe it's the middle of the night. We've been here in Canada for about a month now, had an amazing 3-week gathering that just finished, 54 of us in Calgary, just receiving from Father, receiving and sitting at James and Denise's feet and receiving from them. And now we're on our way to Vancouver, to Abbotsford, where there'll be a conference this coming weekend. But I want to welcome every single one of you from around the world, depending on your time zone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And we're going to take some time. I also want to welcome Anne, who is going to be signing for us again today. Thank you, Anne, for getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning so that you can be here with us. We deeply appreciate that. And so with no further ado, over to you, James.
Okay.
Oh, one more point. Please feel free to ask questions on the chat. And if you have questions, we'll endeavor to address those after James has finished speaking. Thank you, James.
Okay. Well, it is. It's been a bit of a rush. We've been just coming through all the Rockies. This morning we headed away fairly early this morning, and we've stopped a few times for coffee breaks, but it's just been very, our eyes have just about got worn out looking at mountains in the distance and some of them up close, but it's been really quite a drive across there. We're staying here for a couple of nights, and then we carry on again tomorrow to somewhere else, and then on towards Vancouver the day after that, where we have a conference. And then I think we head home in about 7 days' time. And so get home about somewhere around the 30th. I can actually see my daughter-in-law, Nikki, there. She's the one that's laughing with her hands raised in the air. And Rachel, who is, I can see they're sitting in our lounge at home. That's really, really nice to see. So just saying hi. If I need to say hi to people like that, otherwise I get beaten up when I get home, as you can imagine. So yeah, this we just had this 3-week period of time with a number of people. Some came quite a distance. There were some from one or two from Finland. There was a few people from Denmark, and a lot of Canadians, a few Americans, people from many different places. And being 3 weeks long, it was we did it differently, and just in the sense, the reason why I say that, the difference was that I just, during the time, I didn't really worry about trying to fit into some kind of a system that we've done before of subjects to cover. I just kind of shared all the stuff that I feel like the Lord's been teaching me and showing me during COVID and a little bit prior to that, and just looking at the very big picture kind of issues, which even last night grew a little bit. So just in waking up in the night, didn't sleep very well last night, but began to see some even slightly bigger things than I'd seen before. So that was sort of interesting. But it's really amazing to begin to see things from God's perspective of what the future is, and I feel like He's shown me a few things here and there. But what I want to do today, I want to tell you the story of Judah, and just look at some of the issues of his life. The big, saying to Denise earlier on today, I feel like we should just do something fairly basic today, and come back to foundational, rather than big revelation kind of things, just to come back to the core issues of revelation as far as walking with God as our Father. And there's a story here about Judah that I think explains why Jesus came from the tribe of Judah. I think there's such, when you look at Judah himself and his story, his life, you see something that you don't see anywhere else in the Bible as far as his being a son in the family of Jacob and the 12 boys, that all came through that time together. And Joseph, of course, being a major central issue of their story. And but when you look at the story as I want to share it, and it's actually a difficult story to share because the issues, the major issues of it, are spread through many chapters of Genesis, and so to try to bring the points together can be quite difficult to collate them in a verbal way. And so I'm not sure how this is going to go, in the sense of just flowing and continuity and being able to keep the story alive in your minds as I'm telling it. But there's an extraordinary series of events that happen, and Judah is central in this story. And of course, Joseph is central in the story. And you could say Jacob, the father of them, is very central in the story. But I think one of the great things that happens when we read the scriptures and get revelation on something, then it seems that the whole Bible and your perspective of it changes. And so I never dreamed that my perspective of sonship would change by reading a Genesis story, because we normally think of sonship as beginning when Jesus comes into our lives and into our hearts, and we begin to see the Father the way Jesus sees the Father, and we begin to experience the Father's love the way Jesus experienced the Father loving him. But going right back to this story, it's quite extraordinary to me. So I want to just lay a little bit of a foundation. I'm sure most of us know a lot about this story, but we see this situation where Jacob leaves. He runs away from Israel to be away because of fear of his brother Esau, because he has stolen the birthright from Esau, and so he's running for his life, and he runs northeast, the way that Abraham originally came from. He goes back on that path, and he discovers relatives of his from Lot's family, who was left behind on Abraham's journey. He took his nephews with him, and he took others with him, and some of them stayed back in the land of Paddan Aram. And so Jacob runs back as a young man, back along that path, and ends up meeting a relative whom we know as Rachel. And he comes to meet her at the water well because he's looking for a wife, and he's wondering what to do. He has to make a new life for himself. And so he prays at the well, and Rachel comes out to draw water, and a relationship develops, and basically he falls in love with her. And so he wants to marry her, but her father says, you've got to wait 7 years. And it's interesting that the Bible just says, because of his love for Rachel, the 7 years went by fast. We'd often think that love deferred or being put off and having to wait makes things drag out, but when it's really real love, the waiting is not a problem. And it's not a problem for for Jacob to wait. When finally the wedding day comes, 7 years of working for Laban and Rachel's father, the day comes for the wedding, and they get married, but he isn't, the way that she dresses, he's not able to see her face. He expects that it is Rachel he marries, but he doesn't find out until the evening, when they're left alone together, that it's not Rachel, it's Leah that he's married, the sister. And all the scripture says about Leah is that she had weak eyes. We don't know much about Leah, but it wasn't Rachel for Jacob. And so he's really angry with Laban, and he takes the situation to him the next morning when he discovers that it was Leah. And Laban says, "Don't worry, it's wrong that that you would marry the youngest sister. You have to, the oldest sister has to be married first. But now that you've married her, if you work for me another 7 years, I'll give you Rachel as well." And I assume that that means that he married Rachel reasonably quickly, but then had to continue to stay there for another 7 years to pay off his debt, if you like, or to Laban. He finally has cheated Laban through his life, and he runs for his life, taking Leah, and by this time, a number of children. But just to remember all of the way, Rachel is his love, but she can't bear children or doesn't bear children during this time. And so Leah has 4 sons to start with, which are the 4 oldest of the 12 sons of Jacob. They're Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And Judah is the 4th oldest. Reuben is the oldest. And Levi comes third, from which the Levitical priests were descendants. So we see that Judah is the 4th oldest. But as the story goes on, we discover that Judah is probably the strongest personality of all of them, and in some ways is able to override or manipulate them to his will. And even Reuben, we see, is finally afraid of Judah. So those sons come, and then Leah stops bearing children, and so she gives her maid. Strange, I mean, this is right out of kilter for our way of thinking today, but she gives her maid to her husband, and he has 2 children with her. And then Rachel gives her maid to Jacob, and he has 2 children with her. Is it 2? Yes. And then comes back, and Leah has another 2. So now they have 10 children, and none of them are from the wife that he loves. And so in the final end, he comes down to Rachel finally is able to conceive, and she has Joseph. And this is the son of the one that Jacob fell in love with. This is the wife of his choice. This is everything for him. He's obviously totally besotted with her. He's focused. It's totally her. And so her son becomes his favorite. And so he's the 11th son. And as these boys grow, let me say, they escape from Laban's hands and head on back home, make peace with his older brother Esau. And just with cutting the story short, because I want to end up on the best part, but they come back to a normal kind of a life. But Jacob absolutely loves Joseph, and he is the choice son for them. So their life begins to develop, but as they grow older, the boys get incredibly jealous of Joseph because he's the favorite son. And it's highly understandable, I think, for all of us to see that. We all, I think, probably try to have no favorites with our children. And someone said they're all our favorites. But back in this time, Joseph was spoiled. Jacob gave things to Joseph that he didn't give to the others. And so he clothed them in better clothes, in this big story of Joseph's colorful coat that Jacob gave to him as his favorite. And so let me just read this part. We're in Genesis 37 here, but let me just read this. It says, now Israel, to Jacob is the same person. His name was changed to Israel. And I don't want to go into the story too much, but on the way home from where Laban lived, where Rachel and Leah's home was, on their way back to his father, Isaac, he meets his brother Esau, and through a whole event with the Lord, Jacob's name gets changed to Israel. And God touches the muscle of his leg, the thigh muscle, and from that time on he limps. And so he has a new walk, and it says there was a new day and he has a new name. So a whole new era of life begins for Jacob, who now is called Israel. And just reading here from Genesis 37, it says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. So actually 20 years went past between the birth of Jacob and the previous son. So Joseph was much, much younger than all of the others, and obviously was treated different. It says also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So I don't know, there's probably few of us have experienced what this could have been like for Joseph. But with all of his brothers, none of them liked him. They couldn't speak nicely to him at all, and they hated him. And Judah, we'll find soon, was at the head of that hatred. And Reuben, the oldest brother of them all, was more peaceable about it, but he still wasn't for Joseph in any way. And so this whole situation comes where now we've got a family of 11 boys, and then Jacob and Rachel have a second son. And so in the birth of this son, Benjamin, Rachel dies in childbirth. And so now there's these two much, much younger boys and 10 older boys, and the father in the family. And so just coming back to reading from here again, it says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him, meaning Joseph, more than all the brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. The dream was, just to break it down, that his brothers and his father came to him and bowed before him. Now he's this young boy, probably somewhere in his early teens, perhaps mid-teens, somewhere there. The others are grown men, 10, 20 years older and more than him. And so here he is, and he has this dream that all of these grown men who are, mature, capable as fully grown men, and this boy who says, you will all come and bow before me. Now, a lot of people have said Joseph should never have told them the dream, because that's like that people infer he was bragging to them, and kind of getting back at them. There's no evidence whatsoever of that. That's just a conjecture that some people put into the story. But whatever the story is, whatever it happens, here's Joseph, hated by all of his brothers, and he has a very, very exciting dream that God gives to him. And when he tells the story, they even hate him the more. And so Joseph's brothers begin to conspire that they're going to kill him. They're out some distance away from home. We don't know how far this is away, probably a long way. And Joseph comes out to meet them, sent by his father. And it says, then they saw him coming. It says, then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. And we'll see what finally happens to these dreams he's had. Like, let's just take over this, and we'll hide the fact from our father, but we'll kill him and just cast him into a pit somewhere and tell our father a lie that a wild animal ate him or fought him or killed him. It says, but Reuben heard it. When he heard the other boys conspiring this, he wanted to stop them from killing Joseph. And so it says he delivered them out of their hands, and he said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, do not shed his blood, but cast him into a pit which is in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. That he might, and Reuben's idea was that he would come back later and release Joseph from the pit and let him go free. And so they decide that they will do that, and they throw Joseph into this pit. And the next thing we see them eating a meal, obviously we see in the story later, not far away from where Joseph is in the pit. And they eat their meal, and in the morning when they look up, they see a Midianite wagon train, if you like, or a camel train going through. And let me read this part to you. It says, so Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother in our flesh. It's kind of like, we can't kill our brother. You know, he's really playing to them, manipulative, kind of trying to put a spin on the story to stop them from killing him. But really he's thinking, we can actually make this work even more to our advantage than just getting rid of him. We can make money out of this. And so they sell him to this Ishmaelite caravan that's going past. And the brothers pulled Joseph up out of the pit, it says in verse 28 of chapter 37, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. And so you can imagine that these brothers are very pleased that this story is kind of over. We've got rid of him. It's over now. All we have to do is go back and tell our father that some wild animal took him or something happened to him. And there's no blame on us, and we've got rid of him, and the problems of them being the favorite, you know, are over. It's kind of like they're getting vengeance or something back on him, but they also go back with some pieces of silver each. And it says, then they went to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, and told him all that had happened to them, saying, oh, sorry, I've jumped ahead. I've reading the wrong one. Got my main page open in one place and the other page is open in another place. So Reuben goes to find Joseph in the pit. He doesn't know what Judah has twisted the other ones to do. Judah goes back, and Reuben goes back to the pit to get Joseph out and let him free. But when he gets there, he's gone. It says, Reuben returned to the pit, and Joseph was not in the pit. And Reuben says, tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more. What shall we do? Where shall we go? What do we do now? He's not there. So they took Joseph's colored coat and they rubbed it in the blood of a goat and went back, not telling Reuben what had happened. And Judah twisting the story, but not wanting Judah to know the truth that he's been sold into Egypt. And so the story goes on when they get back home. I want to read that to you, what actually happens just a little bit later. But interesting, when they get home, very soon after this, Judah leaves home and travels to a distant country to live there. Just almost immediately, he gets back to his father's home. He leaves home and goes somewhere else. And then there's the whole story of Tamar and Judah's children. He sleeps with a prostitute. There's a whole lot of things happen there. And Judah's life, he lives there about 20 years, and then he comes back again to his father's home. And we don't really have any explanation of what that was about. So when they get back with Joseph's coat, it says, so they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. do you know whether this is your son's tunic or not? And he recognized it straight away, of course. And he says, it is my son's tunic. And he makes the conclusion, a wild beast has captured Joseph and he's been killed. And the boys keep the secret for years and years and years and on into the future. Joseph goes down to Egypt, begins to work for a man named Potiphar, whose wife tries to seduce him. When she finds she can't seduce him, she complains to her husband, who's his boss, that Joseph has tried to rape her, and Joseph gets tried, put in prison, and for a couple of years he's living amongst the criminal element in prison with, obviously very poor situation for him. And we're not going into the story, but through him interpreting the dream of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, Joseph gets released from prison. Now, these years have gone past, a lot of years have gone past since he left home, and he becomes the second man in the kingdom of Pharaoh in Egypt. He becomes a high place of trust, the highest office under Pharaoh. And the Bible actually says in one place that Joseph became a father to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh looked at him as a wise man who was able to help him with his personal responsibilities as king, and he became like a father to him, and the relationship was very strong. Just so that you might understand why this is, if we go back historically, not long before this, there was a group of Syrians who attacked Egypt. They were called the Hyksos, and they attacked Egypt and conquered Egypt before Joseph was sold into Egypt. And so there were Syrians who took on all of the officers of Egypt. And when you understand that Joseph's family came from Chaldea, which is close to Syria, and so the blood is very similar from the Syrians and Abraham and the family. So when Joseph comes down into Egypt, the king or the Pharaoh of Egypt is a Syrian man. And so he sees Joseph as somebody who looks like himself. It's like, you're of my culture. It's like a New Zealander saying to an Australian, you're like me. We're in this together kind of thing. We're of the same type of person. We come from the same kind of background. And so Joseph becomes exalted up into this high place of responsibility. The story goes on that back in all of the country, we see that famine comes to this whole area of the world, to Egypt, to Israel, to the place where Abraham and the family landed, where they stayed, where the family now of Isaac, Jacob, and the children, all over the land, there's great famine. And so the Egyptians, with Joseph interpreting this dream of the Pharaoh, he knew that this great famine was going to come. So he knew also that there's going to be 7 years of plenty before the famine would come. And so Pharaoh put him in charge of all of Egypt, and Joseph saved huge amounts of food, knowing that there was going to come 7 years of incredible famine. And so Egypt had lots of food. Back in Israel, Jacob and the 11 sons with Benjamin are going through into this great famine, and they get less and less and less and less food. And finally, if they don't get food somewhere, the family's going to die. So Jacob sends the sons down, but he will not send Benjamin, because Benjamin is also the only son now of Rachel, who is his heart's love. And the other sons are not in the same category to him. So he lost Joseph, as he is thinking Joseph has been eaten by a wild animal and he is no more, were Jacob's words. But when he looks at Benjamin, he said, I want you boys to go down, but you're not taking Benjamin. I'm not going to risk him. going off and maybe something happening to him and him getting lost. So he sends the guys down, and they come down to Egypt, and they're brought right in front of Joseph. They're coming to buy food. Joseph is the one who dispenses it. He's organized the whole thing for Egypt. And he recognizes his brother, but of course, Joseph, well, they don't recognize him. He was only a young teenager. Now he's probably in his mid to late 20s. And so, and also probably in his position, he would have had the kind of Egyptian haircuts and helmets and things that go with that, and also the heavy face makeup that Egypt had in those days. And so they don't recognize Joseph when he turns up. I mean, when they turn up to get food. And so they begin to try to make a deal. And Joseph knows who they are. And as he talks to them, he asks them about their family. And specifically, it says, is your father still alive? It's just a significant question that he asks. And you can see that Joseph is just so, no news of his father for all these years. And so he asks, is the father still alive? And they say, yes, he is. And how many sons does he have? And they tell him about Benjamin, and that he knows that Benjamin is still alive. And so Joseph then, he pretends he doesn't understand their language. And so they don't know it's him. But at one stage, he's so moved with love for his family that he leaves the room and goes out the back and weeps. Now, he sells them food, and they give the money for the food, and he sells them sacks and sacks of food to take back home with them. But secretly, he puts a silver cup and the money that they use to buy the food with into the bag of Simeon. Now, Simeon is the second oldest. There's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. They're the four oldest sons. And so he puts the silver cup, and I haven't researched that as much, but he puts it into the bag of the second oldest son there. Maybe he suspected that Reuben was partly on his side, or whatever, but and maybe Simeon was more on Judah's side of wanting him to be sold to these the Midianites or the Ishmaelites. The Midianites are a branch of the Ishmaelites, just so you understand the thing there. So he puts the silver cup, Joseph's silver cup, he puts it into the sack with the money they paid for the grain, and puts it into Simeon's sack. And then he sends them away, and they are happily on their way home, not knowing this is in Simeon's sack. They've gone a short distance on their way, maybe a day or two, and Joseph sends out some soldiers to go and overtake them and to search their bags because they're suspected of theft. And so suddenly these soldiers come up on them as they're going home, and suddenly they're like, what's wrong? And the soldiers come up, you have stolen from Pharaoh's man. You have stolen the money that you paid for this food. You stole it back. You stole a cup of his. And they absolutely deny it because they don't know anything about this. This is a setup. And so the soldiers go through their bags, and of course they say, if there's any of us that have stolen this money, stolen this cup, then treat them as you will. But we haven't done anything. And so they go through all of the bags, and when they come to Simeon's bag and open it, there in his bag is the silver cup and the money. And so they take them all back to Joseph. The whole body of them all go back to Joseph. And Joseph is confronting them on this crime of theft, and they are bewildered. They're begging for their lives. But he throws Simeon into jail, and he says to them, if you ever come back, don't come back without Benjamin, your youngest son, because I will not believe you about anything unless you have Benjamin with you. I will not trust you unless you bring your youngest brother with you. So they go back, leaving Simeon in jail. He spends a couple of years in jail in Egypt. They get back to their father, Jacob, and tell him the story about this man in Egypt who was so harsh and everything that happened. And Jacob is just taking it as sorrow upon sorrow for himself. And then they said they'd promised that they would send Benjamin down as well. But Jacob is not wanting that. Finally, they eat all of the food, and they have run out of food again. And so the only thing they can do is to go back to Egypt. And so they tell Jacob, we need to go back, but they say the man won't even listen to us. We won't even get an audience with him. We won't be able to buy any food unless we take Benjamin with us. And Jacob is brokenhearted. And you see this through this whole story, is this father who has these boys, and he has these two of the wife of his love, and one's died, and he is just brokenhearted. And so the boys go back. Let me just I've missed out a little bit of the story. There's so much scripture jumps from page to page in this, and it's so easy just to miss out a part of it. When Simeon was caught with the money and they threw him in jail, Joseph threw him in jail and was sending them away, the boys started to talk to each other. And just let me find this. He put them all in jail together first, and finally he let them all free except for Simeon. But on the first stage, when they'd caught them and brought them back to the city, he put all of them in jail before he actually talked to them, and he could hear them speaking. It's just too many scriptures. Let me just tell you the story. When he put them all in jail, he was overhearing them talk. And as they began to talk amongst themselves, thinking no one understood their language, they said to each other, "This is happening to us because of what we did to Joseph. The reason why this evil is befalling us," or the words in this part of the scripture that I'm reading from, the reason why this has befallen us, because we did wrong to Joseph. And he said, don't you remember the pitiful crying of him begging for us forgiveness, begging to be let free, begging to be not sold or not, he was down in the pit. And see, when they put him into that pit, they didn't go far away and ate their dinner. And they could hear him crying. They could hear him crying out to them and begging them to let him go, let him get out. And none of them responded. None of them except Reuben, who wasn't actually there. He was somewhere, and he came back later trying to fulfill his plan. But all these other 9 sat there listening to Joseph, weeping and crying and calling out to them and begging them to let him free and to bring him back out of the pit. And they wouldn't do it. And they said, this is happening to us. We're now in jail in Egypt because of what we did selling Joseph into Egypt. I mean, they would have had no idea. They would have thought Joseph, if he was still alive, would have been a slave on the pyramids or something, one of many thousands, that he would just be totally lost, and had no idea about this. They begin to see this weeping, that they were denying that when Joseph was weeping and begging to be let out, and they still sold him to the Midianites, and the Midianites took him and sold him as a slave into Egypt in Potiphar's house, and the whole thing happened for Joseph. And so now, as they're going to come back to get more food, and Simeon's in jail, finally they convince their father that there's no hope of food unless we take Benjamin with us, because that man will not see us unless we take Benjamin. So Jacob relents, and you can see this in the words that Jacob talks about. You see this incredible sadness of a man who's risking the one thing that he loves in all of the world, to send him down to Egypt, with the thought, I may never see him again. He's lost Rachel, he's lost Joseph, and now he's risking losing Benjamin as well. So they come down, the brothers come down to Joseph's house. And when they turn up, Joseph meets them. Let me just see if I can read this. When they leave Egypt, when they leave home to go down to Egypt, and Jacob doesn't want them to take Benjamin, Judah says this to his father. It says, Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our children. So Judah is now saying, send the lad with me, send him down, otherwise we're all going to die. You're going to die, we're going to die, our children are going to die, the whole family's going to die. And then he says, I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. And Judah stands in this place and makes this promise to his father. And he's saying, basically saying, Dad, we have to send him or we're all going to die. But I personally will stand in the place of guarantee that he comes back to you. And if by chance he doesn't, basically, I will be responsible for it. You can do whatever you like to me. I will stand responsible for that. And you see, in this, there's the beginning of the story coming to life, where we begin to see a change of heart in Judah. From this cold, let's kill him, killing him isn't enough, let's sell him as a slave. And surely it'd be more merciful to kill him than to sell him as a slave. Just the horrors of that kind of life, living as a slave. If you do get a partner, your children are born slaves. And it goes on for generation after generation. There's no hope of your grandchildren being anything other than slaves, your great-grandchildren, and just the horrors of that. Judah was happy to sell Joseph into that life. But now he's saying, send him with me. I will stand surety for him. And so they come back down to Egypt. And when Joseph sees Benjamin, he goes to him and puts his arms around him and weeps on his shoulders. Now, they don't know who Joseph is. He's just this Egyptian king's man. But he comes to Benjamin and he holds him in his arms and weeps on his shoulders. You see, this is his only real brother, his only full brother. And so he doesn't still tell them, but he gives them food, and he sells them food, and he sells them as he did the first time, because they brought Benjamin, and he gives them all of the food. And he releases Simeon after a couple of years of being in jail and sends them all back home with the food, but he puts a silver cup and the money into Benjamin's sack. You wonder why he would do that. But he's a clever man. But he puts the food and everything into Benjamin's sack. Same thing has happened before. They go back, he sends out an army. The army comes saying, you've stolen again from the king. They say, no, we haven't. They find the gold and the cup in Benjamin's sack. And they know what that means. They know that means that Pharaoh is going to take Benjamin and put him in jail. Something happens in the heart of Judah. I've got to read this to you. Let me just catch up with the story. When they had gone out of the city and not yet far away, Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Because I did you good, I released Simeon, I gave you food. Why have you repaid me with evil for stealing these things?'" He says, is not this the one from the cup from which my Lord drinks? And they're going to find that. And so he tells them what to say and says, so he overtook them and spoke to them these same words. And they said, oh, I don't have to go into all of this. Sorry. The best way is just to tell you the story. Yeah. They find, it says, then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So the man from Egypt, the Egyptian soldier, searched them. And he began with the oldest and worked through the sacks of all of them until he came to the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes. This is all of the older brothers. Absolute distress. They've seen their father saying to them, don't take Benjamin with you. I'm afraid that something will happen to him. Don't take him with you. And so they finally they convince Jacob to send Benjamin with them. So they send Benjamin. Now they've gone through all the sacks, and the money is found in Benjamin's sack. It says they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this that you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? So they don't know who he is, what he is. But they're saying, don't you know that I can find out from the spirit world what's happened? You can't hide the truth from me. Why have you lied to me like this? And then Judah says, and here's this incredible and wonderful speech of Judah's. It says, then Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. As for you, go in peace to your father's house. So he's saying to all of the brothers, I've got no beef with you. You haven't done anything wrong, just the youngest boy. He has stolen this cup. He has stolen this money. You haven't done anything wrong. You've done everything right. You've come, now go back, and just the boy will be in jail. Then Judah came to him again, and he says, oh, my Lord. And it makes me cry when I read some of this. He says, oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing. He's speaking to Joseph. And he's saying, let me just talk to you a moment privately. Do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servants, asked us, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. It's Judas talking about his father loving Benjamin. And said, then you said to your servant, bring him down to me that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. What a change we see in Judah. Now he's looking at Benjamin, who is the favored son in Joseph's place. And he said, how can we go back? If this boy is not with his father will die. If his father loves him so much, he will die. And we don't want him to die. That's what he's saying. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with me, you shall see my face no more. So it was when we went up to your servant, my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down if our youngest brother is not with us. For he said, we will not see his face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then my father said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, surely he's torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls me, you shall bring my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Joseph's hearing the story of his own father here. Now, therefore, when I come to you, your servant, my father, and the lad is not, if I come home, he's saying, and the lad is not with me, since my father's life is bound up in the lad's life. So my father, if this son doesn't come home, my father will die. His life and the life of his son are one. They're so united. And if he sees us without the boy, Benjamin, he will die. If I do not bring him back to you, he's saying, I will bear the blame before my father forever. He's telling Joseph, if I do not bring the boy back to my dad, I will carry the blame of this for the rest of my life. He says, so please, let me stay in jail and let the boy go home. Let me take his place, because I cannot stand that my father would have his heart broken. You see, the key verses of the story is when Judah gets back from having sold Joseph into Israel. When Judah gets back, he sees that absolute traumatized despair of his father in losing Joseph. And he sees his father, it says he was inconsolable. It's something, part of the story that I left out in the middle, and I left out on purpose. It's when Judah got back and all the boys got back and they had Joseph's blood-filled cloak. They said what happened was they began to hear their father weep and wail with grief at the loss of Joseph. And that's why Judah left home at that time and went to live in a far country, because he realized this was not a my jealousy over the boy issue. This is a my father's love for the boy issue. My father loves the boy. And it broke Judah's heart, and he couldn't stand looking at his father again for years. And he goes away and lives in another country for years, and finally comes back. And now the whole thing has come up again. And now the situation is, it's going to happen again with Benjamin. If I go back without Benjamin, I will see the grief of my father again. And I cannot stand to watch my father go through that grief again. And so he says, let the boy go back, let me take his place. There's so much similarity here in the cross of Jesus, who comes to look for the sheep that was lost, the last sheep, and gives his life. But see, the reason why he gives his life is because of the grief of his father. And we see that Jesus had this incredible heart for his father, and he saw the grief in his father's heart over the human race being lost. And the story is here with Judah. We see the same thing happening in Judah, that he sees the grief in his father's heart. He cannot stand to watch it again. And he begs Joseph to let him take the place. And what Joseph does, he says, I am Joseph. I am Joseph. And they hardly believe their ears. But he says it's and he makes himself known to them. And he's able to say, in the midst of this, seeing this incredible remorse in Judah, who was the key issue, the key culprit. He was the one who hatched the plan to throw or to kill Joseph, But then he couldn't, because Reuben withstood him and said, no, let's not kill him. We can't do that. We're brothers. He's our brother after all. We can't do that. And so Judah relents, but then he even goes a step worse and he says, well, let's sell him as a slave to Egypt and condemn him to that life, and we'll get some money for him. And he goes home and he sees the grief in his father's face and his heart, and his crying and his wailing and weeping. And he leaves home because he can't handle it. When he leaves home, God does something in his heart. And now all these years later, faced with the same situation again, he puts his own life on the line because he wants to see his brother go home to his father. It's an amazing story. It's no wonder that Jesus is known as the Lion of Judah, because he is honoring the redemption of Judah's heart. Judah was the one who had no son's heart, but began to learn to have compassion for his father. He came into a place of such compassion that he would say, let me go into jail and not the youngest boy. I will go into jail. Let him be free so that my father's heart won't be broken. I think this is the only place in Scripture where it gives us a clear picture of what it means for us to walk as sons and daughters of God. One of the key parts of our walk with God as our Father is we come to understand his love for us. We come to experience his love for us. We come to know him as a loving Father to us. You see, there are other sons out there yet. There are other daughters out there yet. There are ones who are still in slavery out there yet. There's ones who are in a pit. And our Father's heart is breaking for them as Jacob's heart was breaking for the loss of Joseph. This is the only place where we see the real motivation for evangelism. It's the place where we see the motivation for taking the revelation of the love of the Father to the world. The motivation is not just for some kind of, that we might have a ministry, that we might have an anointing, or we might become effective for God in some way, that we might have some kind of a profile, that we might become something significant or have a significant life. The reality is that the purpose of this is that our Father's heart today is breaking for those who don't know that their Father loves them, and that he is reaching out to every one of them. As the love of the Father comes into our hearts, more and more, we will see the compassion that we've had to forgive those who have sinned against us become a compassion for those who are still lost, out somewhere in the world, somewhere in slavery, somewhere in bondage, somewhere in captivity, somewhere in whatever situation they're in. Normally, we've used this session on the watering hole as a place for us to gain revelation into the nature and the character of our Father and the workings of what it means to be a Christian and how that is for us. But I just wanted today to, and I think perhaps just being in Canada ourselves for away overseas anyway from our home, and just thinking back to the times that the Lord's taken us around the world in the past, the places we've gone, and seeing those who have come alongside and want to be a part of this ministry of the Father's love and been so impacted by it, and seeing the reality of it, seeing the incredible seen through the veils of others or issue of what it means to be a Christian, to see that we are to walk the path Jesus walked. I believe that God is wanting to open our hearts to the world and see that we need to bring this revelation of the Father's love to the whole world. This is, I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a, I don't know what I am, but I'm not an evangelist as I've known what evangelists are. But the one thing that's growing more and more in my heart is I know we have a father who has lost all of his children. And there's not one that he doesn't want back. He loves them all as his pure, original, personal sons and daughters to him. And he wants them to come home. We don't have to become evangelists. We don't have to become great preachers. But I do believe we need to become people with great compassion. I believe we need to become people who have a heart to want to see people come home. I believe he wants us to become people who look over the fence into the other nation and into our own nation, and just begin to have compassion, not for so much the lost, but for our Father who wants them home. That we have compassion to reach out to people, not for our sakes, not even for their sakes, but for our Father's sake, because he loves them so much. See, that's what Judah did. He saw Benjamin. This was the son that was Joseph's brother, full brother. He had no kindness towards Joseph. I doubt he had much for Benjamin either, until he saw his father's love for Benjamin. And that was what motivated him to even give his life, in the sense of spending it in jail so that Benjamin could be free. Of course, the wonderful thing of the story is God doesn't want anyone to be in jail. He wants you and I to be as free as what he is. He wants us to be as free as all of the sons and daughters. There's no partiality with him. But when we look at our Father and we see his love for us, we need to just realize that that love is identical love to the person maybe who we struggle to get along with at our work. We might struggle to get along with because of their ideology. We might struggle to get along with them in our minds because of their belief systems. God loves them just like he loves us. And it breaks his heart. I'm not trying to motivate people to get out and do anything, but I am motivating us to this one thing. Have a heart. Have compassion. Let the love that God has for you give you a perspective of the whole world, the whole human race. That we can see many sons come home to our Father. You know, I see some of you that have been out doing A schools and B schools and preaching in conferences and running weekends and all kinds of things for the Father's love. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Ignite others with the same passion. Ignite others with the same compassion. Don't swamp your life with activity, but do let it get swamped in compassion. Because when the compassion is there and it gets released, people are going to come home. And our Father's joy of seeing them come home is the same as Jacob's when he saw Joseph again. Imagine that. When he came down to Egypt and Joseph opened up a whole place for them to live, food aplenty, whole family established in his kingdom. And Joseph was able to say, you brothers, you meant this for evil against me, but God's hand was on it for good for all of us. What a fantastic place of compassion. Sometimes we might get caught up in kind of conflicts with people, and we think like this is really a conflict that's going on here. This is really a bad thing that these people are bad because they're doing this and that and the other thing. But God means it all for good for us, that we can reach out to them and bring them home. So God bless you all, and thank you. I flounder around to get that story across because it's such a convoluted story. But when we come to the end of it, the simple fact is, when Judah heard the cries of Joseph in the pit, he took no notice. But when he heard the cries of his father, when he got home and told him that Joseph looks like he's been eaten by a wild animal, he heard the cries and he couldn't stand it. And he went and lived in another place so he wouldn't have to listen. And then when it came all back to him, standing before his father, saying, I've brought this other son of yours down here, now it's going to happen again. He couldn't face it. Couldn't face the grief of his father. That's what he couldn't face. And so he would sell himself into slavery instead. So I don't really know how to finish this. But let's all of us, as brothers and sisters to each other, begin to look outside of ourselves to those that we are able to make contact with, able to bring into the love of the Father. And let's just love them and bring them in whenever we can. And I certainly don't mean, burn yourself out to do it or whatever, exhaust yourself, but fit compassion and the outworking of compassion into your life. And with joy, love people. Bring them back to our Father, however we can do that. So God bless you. And Richard, I hand it back to you.
James, thank you very, very much. That was amazing. Can we take a few moments? Let's not move on too quickly from this. The scripture says that when Jacob realized that Joseph was lost, he refused to be comforted. He refused to let anything be taken of the pain that he felt at the loss of Joseph. And this is the heart, as James has so clearly shown us. This is the heart of the Father for each one of us, that he won't let anything take away from the longing that he has for each one of us to come home, for each one of us to see him and to experience the fullness of his love for each one of us. Let's just take a few moments in his presence and just sit in his love for us, his compassion for us, his longing, his heart for us. Even as he reaches out to you in this moment. He's not distracted from his purposes towards you. He's not distracted from his heart towards you, his longing towards you. Even for a nanosecond, even for a moment, longing that you would be fully home. Just lean into his breast, lean into his embrace, lean into his bosom. Thank you, Father. And in your heart, just imagine the joy that Jacob must have experienced when he realized that Joseph was still alive. The overwhelming joy. He must have been beside himself with joy. And just as it says in Luke chapter 15, my son was dead, but he is alive again. Just see that joy. This is that same joy that Father has towards you. Same longing, that same joy, that same celebration as he welcomes you into his arms and into his embrace, into his fullness. Thank you, Father. Thank you for not only loving us so well, but for loving us utterly and completely, perfectly. Thank you, Father. I wonder if Joseph, after everything that he had been through, everything that he'd experienced, I'm sure when Jacob put his arms around him and held him that first time, after years and years of separation, that in that moment, Joseph just became a little boy in his father's arms once again, became a child. Everything else fell away because all that mattered was that he was Jacob's son. And it's in moments like this that everything else falls away in the Father's embrace. Everything else falls away. Whatever challenges we're facing, whatever difficulties we're facing. As we experience the fullness of his love for us, his fathering love and his mothering love, his compassion and his comfort. Thank you, Father. Well, James, thank you again. That was amazing.
It's certainly an amazing story.
Yes.
I guess that's why these stories are recorded for us, so that we can see that ordinary human beings like us who've done all kinds of things, that there's recovery. God's got redemption. He brings us back. He understands, and he uses time to restore us, because he loves all of us. I think if we'd have met Judah or seen him, if we'd been one of those Midianites that brought Joseph off Judah, we would have thought he was a pretty horrible person. And but we didn't know what God's going to do with him, what time's going to do, and what's really in his heart, and what the future holds. We can be so quick to judge people, and then we see the whole story played out, and and the Son of God comes and he calls himself the Lion of Judah. Isn't that fantastic?
That really is. That really is.
One time many years ago, I was asking the Lord, what's my name? What does he call me? And I'm not going to tell you, but I asked him, what does he call me? What's his name for me? And he said a word that I would never have dreamed. I would have thought that that word is completely inappropriate for me. I fall so far short of that word. And, you know, I don't think anyone else would have thought that word was appropriate in those days either. Maybe few even today, but he has a name for us. He sees us all differently. And to know the way he sees us holds us in good stead. There's other people, and maybe even people with reason, to not like us or to judge us for whatever reason. I can't imagine that you could have judged anyone worse than you would have judged Judah at that time. I mean, I read a lot. I have read a lot all my life. And slavery is the worst thing you can do to anybody. Just the total taking, you take their life away. There's no dreams, no hopes, no possibilities, no reason, no purpose. Your whole life is just to become a machine that does a job and is completely disregarded of all value. And then when you have children, if you do, you know the future is the same for them. I mean, I can't imagine the horror of that. And yet the Lord saw in Judah something that he could redeem, and
Yes.
something that he would even name himself after. Isn't that extraordinary? Absolutely extraordinary.
Well, there hasn't really been any questions in the chat, and you know what? I don't think we want to go from our hearts to our heads anyway. I think we want to stay in what you've presented to us today, James, and just allow that to marinate within our hearts. Yes, let's call it a day there. Let's call it a day there, and we'll leave everything open for a little while if you would like to talk to others from around the world. But I'm going to let James go. It's been a long day for he and Denise, and we'll leave things open for a little while if you would like to come off mute and talk to others that are on the call. Thank you again, James.
God bless everybody. Raise your hands. Good to see you.
Very much looking forward to being with you soon, Hans and Bodil. It's not long now.
Yeah.
It'll be great. We're looking forward to that too.
Thank you, James, for sharing this beautiful story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to unmute yourselves.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Thank you, James.